My sister tricked our parents into signing their house over to her. She looked at me and laughed. Now you have nowhere to live. I thought she had won, until the lawyer smirked and said, actually, that house was never theirs to give. When my sister found out who the real owner was, she went pale and collapsed in shock. I had been standing in the living room when she first told me. She crossed her arms, smirking like she had won some kind of game. Well, she dragged out the word, enjoying herself. Mom and Dad signed the house over to me this morning. It's mine now. My heart sank. This was our family home, the place where I grew up, where we had birthdays, where I had late-night talks with Mom in the kitchen, and now my sister stood there, gloating. She even laughed. You should have been smarter, she said. You should have seen this coming. I turned to my parents, hoping for some kind of denial, but Mom wouldn't meet my eyes, and Dad just sighed. They knew. They had done this willingly. Why? I asked, my voice shaking. Why would you give her the house? You know I live here. I take care of everything. Mom finally looked at me, but she just looked tired. She's family. So am I snapped. This house belongs to me too. My sister snorted. Not anymore. I had worked hard for this house. I paid bills, took care of our parents, and made sure everything ran smoothly. Meanwhile, my sister never lifted a finger, and now she had taken it all away. But she had no idea what she had actually done. This isn't over, I said. She just rolled her eyes. Oh, it is. The house is mine now. You can't do anything about it, and honestly, you should have moved out years ago. It's pathetic that you're still here. My hands shook with anger, but I stayed quiet. She thought she had won. She was wrong. I turned and left. No yelling, no slamming doors. I just got in my car and drove to my lawyer. Mr. Reynolds was an experienced man who had seen it all. When I explained the situation, he leaned back in his chair and smirked. So, your parents gave the house to your sister? He asked. I nodded. And they thought they had the right to do that? I nodded again. That's when he smiled, a knowing, confident smile. Actually, he said, tapping his pen on the desk, that house was never theirs to give. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? I asked. Mr. Reynolds opened a drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and dropped it onto his desk. You want to know who actually owns that house? My heart pounded as I stared at him. He flipped through the papers and pointed to one. You do. I blinked. What? Your grandfather left it to you in his will. He slid the document closer. Legally, that house has been yours since he passed away. Your parents never owned it. They had the right to live there, but they couldn't give it away. I was stunned. I had always assumed my parents owned the house. It never even crossed my mind to check. But my grandfather, who always favored me over my sister, who saw right through her, had left it to me. And my sister had no idea. I took a deep breath. So what happens now? Mr. Reynolds smirked. Now? He said. Now we have some fun. I didn't go home that night. I stayed at a friend's place and let my lawyer handle it. The next morning, he filed an order stopping my sister from making any changes to the house. No selling, no renovations, no moving in. That's when she finally called me. I ignored the first 3 calls. On the 4th, I picked up. What the hell did you do? She screamed. I leaned back in my chair. What do you mean? She was furious. The lawyer just called. He said I can't touch the house. He said it's not mine. I let the silence hang, just long enough for her to panic. Then I said, that's because it never was. She went silent. You should have checked before you pulled your little stunt, I said. Legally, that house has been mine for years. No, she whispered. That's not possible. Oh, it is. Grandpa left it to me, not Mom and Dad, and definitely not you. I heard her sharp intake of breath. No, that's a lie. That's not true. Mom and Dad didn't own it, I said calmly. They thought they did, but they were wrong. She gasped. I didn't know if it was shock or rage. Now, I continued, you have 2 choices. 1, you admit you messed up, back off, and we forget this ever happened. Or 2, I paused, you push your luck, and we go to court. You wouldn't, she whispered. I laughed. Oh, I absolutely would, and trust me, if this goes to court, you're going to lose. For the first time, my sister had nothing to say. That's when it happened. My sister had spent her whole life playing games, turning people against each other, twisting the truth to get what she wanted, but now, she was realizing she had lost before she even began. The next morning, she stormed into my lawyer's office. Her face was red, her eyes wild. She demanded that something be done. She yelled, threatened, and even accused me of stealing the house. Mr. Reynolds stayed calm, letting her rant. When she finally stopped, he simply tapped the legal papers on his desk and said, I'd recommend you leave before you embarrass yourself any further. That's when it happened. She collapsed into a chair, her face pale. For the first time, she looked truly defeated. This isn't fair, she whispered. I crossed my arms. Neither is trying to steal a house from your own brother. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. But I already told people the house was mine. I made plans. I tilted my head. That sounds like a you problem. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, and in that moment, I knew she finally understood. She had lost. For days, she went silent. No calls, no texts. I thought maybe she had accepted defeat. I should have known better. People like her don't just walk away, they find new ways to make things worse. It started with my parents. They showed up at my house early one morning, knocking like they still owned the place. I considered ignoring them, but I knew they wouldn't leave, so I opened the door. My mom gave me a look of pure disappointment. How could you do this to your sister? I let out a dry laugh. Are you serious? She's family. My dad sighed, shaking his head. You're really going to kick her out over some technicality? I stared at them in disbelief. A technicality? She tried to steal my house. She didn't steal it, my mom snapped. We gave it to her. And you never had the right to give it away. I shot back. Do you even hear yourselves? You tried to hand over something that never belonged to you. They didn't answer because they knew I was right, but my mom tried another approach. She softened her voice, sighed like she was the real victim, and said, Look, your sister made a mistake, okay? But you don't have to punish her for it, just let her stay. I almost laughed. Let her stay? In my house? Yes, my dad said firmly. It's not like you're married or have kids, you don't need all this space. And just like that, everything became clear. So that's what this was, I said. You decided I didn't deserve the house, that my sister needed it more, and you expected me to just accept it. I took a deep breath, my blood boiling. Let me make something very clear, she is never setting foot in this house again, and neither are you. When the court date arrived, I walked in with my lawyer, calm and prepared. My sister? She showed up looking smug, convinced the judge would take her side. For the first 5 minutes, she put on her act. She talked about how our parents gave her the house, how I was refusing to leave, how I was being difficult out of spite. The judge listened patiently, then my lawyer stood up. He laid out every fact. He presented the real deed, proving I had been the owner for years. He showed my grandfather's will, making it clear the house was only mine. And then he dropped the bombshell. He presented the fake eviction notice my sister had filed. The judge's expression darkened. She turned to my sister. Miss, are you aware that falsifying legal documents is a serious offense? My sister's smirk vanished. She turned white. What? You filed an eviction notice against the legal owner of the house. The judge continued. That is fraud. My sister stammered, looking desperately at our parents, but for the first time in her life, even they couldn't help her. Because this time, she wasn't just losing the house. She was about to lose everything. The courtroom was silent. My sister looked like she might faint. My parents sat behind her, frozen and pale. The judge tapped her pen on the desk. Miss, you knowingly filed false legal documents to remove the rightful owner from their home. That is a crime. My sister opened her mouth, but no words came out. I'm ruling in favor of the defendant, the judge continued. The house legally belongs to him. Also, I'm referring this case for possible fraud charges. That was it. That was the moment she realized it was over. She turned to me, eyes wide with panic. You won't let them charge me, right? I leaned back, arms crossed. Why shouldn't I? Tears filled her eyes. I didn't mean it. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I tilted my head. You laughed when you thought you won. You told me I had nowhere to live. She went silent. She knew I was right. The judge dismissed her case and made it clear she would be investigated, but I wasn't finished yet. Outside the courthouse, my parents stopped me. My mom's eyes were full of tears. You can't do this to her. I scoffed. She did it to herself. She committed fraud. My dad snapped. And whose fault is that? I shot back. I didn't tell her to forge documents. I didn't tell her to steal from me. That was her choice. But she's your sister, my mom pleaded. I clenched my jaw. And I'm your son? But that didn't stop you from trying to take my house, did it? They had no answer, so I delivered the final blow. Since you care about her so much, why don't you take her in? I said, because she's not coming back to my house. My mom gasped. You wouldn't. Oh, I would. I pulled out my phone. In fact, I already had my lawyer draft an eviction notice for both of you. My dad's face turned red. You can't evict your own parents. Why not? I said. You had no problem trying to do it to me. Silence. My mom started crying. Where will we go? I shrugged. Not my problem. Because they had made their choice. They chose my sister over me. They tried to take what was mine. Now, they had nothing. The eviction went through. My parents fought it, but they had no legal right to stay. They packed up and left, taking my sister with them. They ended up in a small apartment across town, far from the big house they thought was theirs forever. As for my sister, she did get charged with fraud. The court didn't go easy on her. She got a huge fine and a criminal record. And the worst part for her? That perfect image she had built, the one she used to manipulate people, was destroyed. No more bragging, no more looking down on me. Now, when people talked about her, it wasn't about how smart she was. It was about how she tried to steal from her own brother, and failed miserably. I still live in my house. My house. It's quiet, peaceful, no more fights, no more betrayal, just me, finally enjoying what was always mine. And my parents? My sister? I don't hear from them much, but sometimes, I hear updates. My sister struggles to find work with her record. My parents regret everything. They whisper about how they lost everything. And you know what? I don't feel bad, not even a little. They tried to ruin my life. Instead, they ruined their own.